really excited to be here. I really enjoy talking about secondary education and secondary environmental education. And I'm excited to hear what your experiences have been and to talk a little bit more about bringing these topics into your classrooms. Um, yeah, I'm saying teacher and classroom, but I know that not everyone's in a traditional classroom space and you might not be working with high school students, but hopefully there's something in the presentation that you can take away as well. I'll just introduce myself. I'm Amelia Moore, she, her. I'm the National Education Program Assistant with Ducks Unlimited Canada. My background is in geography and secondary education, and I've been working in environmental education and programs for about 7 years. So a little more about DUC. Like I said, we're a wetland conservation organization in Canada. We have counterparts in the US and Mexico as well. And largely we work to conserve, restore, and manage wetlands for everyone's benefit and are engaged in a lot of diverse conservation work across Canada. Yeah, we have education teams that deliver wetland biodiversity and nature education. So we work with everyone from elementary school students up to university students to support wetland exploration, stewardship, and conservation skill building. And that's kind of where these case studies came out of as well, primarily from our high school program. So today I'm presenting to you from Grand Lake, Nova Scotia, here on the east coast of Canada, which is the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. This territory is covered by the Treaties of Peace and Friendship, which set out the responsibilities and relationships for all those living here. So when we're thinking about conservation work and our connections to the land around us, our relationship to reconciliation and Indigenous knowledge and stewardship of these lands is especially important. Our conservation and education efforts include a commitment to continuing to learn and engage with our understanding of these lands and of Indigenous traditions, histories, and cultures, and to working in collaboration with Indigenous peoples in our work. I wasn't sure. I wanted to make sure we had a chat that's for this room and that I'm not bothering everyone in the main chat.
It'll be
Um,
just for us.
okay, excellent. But it would be great to hear where other folks are joining from. And if you'd like to introduce yourself, that would be great too. Awesome. See a few chats there. It's so nice to be chatting with people from everywhere, from such a wide geographic range. Awesome. Oh, with Canadian. Go. The Dallas Zoo, Seattle, Tennessee. Fantastic. Cool. I'm going to be talking about lots of Canadian regions. I'm kind of curious where the overlap is for especially those US locations and where you're seeing similar conservation issues that these might be relevant. Awesome. All right. Well, if you're still typing, I'm sure we'll see those come up. Great to hear where everyone's from. All right. So to get us started and kind of thinking about where these resources might fit for you, I'm curious what grades and courses you teach or have taught or are teaching, and what are important conservation issues in your community. Maybe these are things that your students are seeing. Maybe these are things you're hoping at some point to bring into your classroom. But what are those top of mind conservation issues where you are? And maybe while folks are typing, I'll share. So I'm working in environmental science with DUC at the moment, but my previous career was teaching grade 11 social studies in interior British Columbia on the West Coast. Um, and Not dissimilar to Marcus, we talked a lot about freshwater ecology, definitely. And also my students were really familiar with wildfires, which unfortunately I think we're all becoming familiar with wildfires. And so when we would talk about it in class, students would always have lots to contribute from their own knowledge. Awesome. Thanks for your messages, Lindsay and Audrey. All sorts of ages. Woody Adelgid, definitely Eastern Hemlock in our forest ecology class. Fantastic. And all ages. Great. Marine conservation issues, including wetlands. Excellent. Yeah, definitely. So many important conservation issues, really, if you're in any location here. Ave desert tortoise. Interesting. Doing outreach. Fantastic. Zoo educator. Ooh, grizzly bear reintroductions, carnivore coexistence, and pollinator conservation. Neat. Awesome. Well, it's great to hear like the range of things that people are working on. So with our case studies, our hope is to support people in considering real world solutions to real world environmental problems. So I pulled a couple local news articles here from locations across Canada. So Phragmites in New Brunswick, wildfires in the territories in the Yukon, grassland birds in Edmonton, or sea level rise on Vancouver Island. These are topics that students are seeing in the news that they're experiencing in their communities. And we do sometimes hear from them that they're excited to learn about something that they're hearing about, but maybe don't have a chance to talk about in class. So this is a quote from a student from a few years ago who said, "We hear about wildfires in the news, but it's not covered in school. This was an opportunity to learn about something having a real impact on our lives and communities." And students have a unique perspective from their own location to come at these issues from. And if they're not familiar with an issue, if they want to learn about another region, then this is a way to learn about a different region as well. So I went through this already, but we have 5 case study options because we're a national Canadian organization. They're available in both French and English. We suggest grades 9 to 12. Those are the students that we've had success with and who've participated when we run case studies before. And they are really adaptable in length. If this is a short exploration, a couple days on a conservation issue, that works for that. But also, if this is a final project, multi-week exploration, then this can really be stretched out. And yeah, I wanted to kind of highlight that no background knowledge is needed if this is a little far away from the conservation that you're used to talking about. Hopefully, this is a great kind of door into other conservation issues. And I know we're just a small group, so if at any time you have questions or I'm moving too fast, please let me know either in the chat or by unmuting. So these are our conservation case studies. So in the Boreal forest, which here we've got kind of located in British Columbia, but of course runs through Canada, we have our wildfire case study. We have a grasslands case study that's set in the prairies and looks at grasslands and agricultural use, as well as another prairie case study that looks at wetland size and biodiversity conservation. And then our most recent case study is our invasive Phragmites that's set in southern Ontario and Quebec, although we're seeing Phragmites in a lot of other locations too. And then in the Atlantic here on the East Coast, we have a sea level rise case study. So I'll give you a few more details about each of these. A key feature of all the case studies is that they have one key question that students are working towards answering. So this is like ultimately the goal as they work towards a solution, they're aiming for this question. So for our wildfire case study in the Boreal forest, key question is fire breaks, cultural and prescribed fire and wetland conservation. What strategies will you use to address wildfires in the Boreal forest? So some student research considerations are learning about the Boreal forest ecosystem and the animals that live there and the communities that live there, wetland conservation, fire break construction, and cultural fire and collaboration with Indigenous communities in this region. Our Grasslands case study, as we kind of move west to east across the country, is located in the Canadian Prairies. Question is, which conservation approach will be most beneficial to maximize biodiversity in the Canadian grasslands? So students learn about grassland ecosystems, biodiversity, and keystone species, including the historic role of bison. Thinking about managing grasslands with fire, managing grasslands with grazing, and involving the community in those conservation decisions. Staying in the prairies, we're in the Prairie Pothole region that extends across our border. So the key question here is a little more technical. Will you protect one 10-hectare wetland or 10 1-hectare wetlands? So students learn about the Prairie Pothole region, about specifically wetland species and biodiversity conservation, looking at specifically wetlands, and the agricultural use in this area. In the St. Lawrence Great Lakes region, this is, like I said, our newest invasive Phragmites case study, which I was really privileged to work on. So our key question here is moths, goats, and herbicide. What tools can protect wetlands from invasive Phragmites? So here we kind of start with an exploration of invasive species, and then look at specifically Phragmites and its impact on ecosystems and habitat. And then students dive into all the different restoration tools that are really actively being tried out to address Phragmite. So everything from mechanical control, so cutting, drowning, rolling, but also having goats eat the Phragmites, which students always think is a bit of a hoot. Biocontrol, which is often new to students, and then chemical control, herbicide, and then thinking about, depending on what restoration tools students are interested in exploring, how do you involve the community and what are the local impacts of your solution. And then the last one is our sea level rise case study on the Atlantic coast. So the question here is develop a climate change adaptation plan that incorporates salt marsh restoration and dike upgrades, or both, to protect from sea level rise. So here students start by learning a little bit of the history of Atlantic Canada and historic agricultural use and the Wabanaki Confederacy, so traditional uses of the land on the East Coast. They also look at the impacts of climate change and the connections to sea level rise. And then they explore salt marsh restoration, as well as the dike infrastructure that exists and is often in need of restoration. And similar with the other case studies, there's a piece of community involvement here and thinking about what makes sense for the people who live in these different regions. So the case studies are set up to each include a teacher and student workbook. The idea is that all the information that you need to get started is in these workbooks, and you're hopefully not having to go and search out additional resources, at least initially. So the workbooks are meant to guide teachers through the case study process and students through their research process to come to decisions. So you don't necessarily have to come in as an expert. Some introductory background knowledge is provided to get everyone started. And these are, as I said, really challenging questions that are still ongoing. So there's often not one correct answer that students are aiming for, but to think about how they got there and what they're learning during their research process. So no matter how an instructor chooses to structure their case study in class, it's generally going to look something like this. We start with an introduction that gets our students excited, gets them interested in the topic, and then we set them free on some research to learn about the topic with, guidance depending on your students and your classroom. And then this all comes together in some sort of presentation or final product that students put together to share what they've learned and address that key question. So when we run this case study, we work with our high school student program. It also means we run it online with support from teachers in classrooms who run the case studies in their classrooms, and then we come together as an organization and host a competition for students. So when we host, we do about 2 weeks of research after an introductory workshop. And we also give students the choice between 2 case studies. So it's one of the ways that we've chosen to build in some student choice is to each year choose 2 of the case studies, and students choose what's most interesting to them. After their 2 weeks of research, students come and present to a panel of judges with conservation expertise. And because it's a competition format, we have the judges score them on a rubric and coordinate to ask some expert questions. Students don't always have the perfect answers to those questions, but it's a really good chance for them to put that research to use one more time and talk with folks who are experts and who have on-the-ground experience. But I want to stress that this looks really different in other classes. We kind of provide the structure, and even when we run the case study, the teachers in their individual classrooms help support research in a way that's going to work for their students. And we've tried to make this as adaptable to different formats as possible. So I'm going to give a little overview of the workbooks just so you have a sense of what's included, and then we'll talk about some classroom considerations. So like I said, each case study has a student workbook and a teacher workbook, and they're both going to start with a little background knowledge. And this is a great place to start for an introduction. If this is a topic that's new to you and your students, you can both start by reading the background information together to kind of give you a jumping off point. In the student workbook, after that background information, students are given a bit of a scenario to get them in the mindset of a planner or a conservation specialist who's addressing this issue. So this in particular is our Grasslands case study. So the students are told that the location is the Canadian Prairies, and you've been hired by Ducks Unlimited Canada as a conservation planner to develop a conservation strategy for a new area of land that has grasses, forests, and wetlands on it. So each of these are a little different. Sometimes they're hired by the local municipality. Sometimes they have an area that's defined. Sometimes it's just in the boreal forest, but it sets the scene for students. Next in the student workbook is the research questions. These are designed to guide students towards a baseline understanding of the environmental issue, and then to equip them to create an informed solution. So the hope here is that if students work their way through these research questions that are broken down into different sections, that they will have gathered enough information to then make a proposal and come to their own conclusions. So our hope is that this section is key for making the case studies accessible. This is where we guide students through the research process and have thought about a few avenues for them to explore the case study, the tools, and then to come to their own conclusions. So the focus here is to put the focus on student research and to guide them into drawing conclusions and coming to a solution. So for the Grasslands case study, at the end, they're asked to provide a conservation plan. So again, this looks a little different in each of the case studies, but eventually this is going to come into some sort of conclusion for them. So here it says, which conservation approach will be most beneficial to maximize biodiversity in our Canadian grasslands? The tools that they've explored in this study are managing with fire, manage with grazing, and incorporating community input. So using those answers, they're to come up with a conservation plan to say, how will you manage the wetland here? How will you manage the agricultural land? And how will you manage the pasture land? And then at the end of the student workbook, there's a short Meet the Experts section. So here, Charlotte and Leah are, Charlotte works for DUC and Leah works for the Manitoba Beef and Forage Initiative. And they helped review these case studies and put their scientific background into helping us create these. On the other side is the teacher workbook, and this hopefully gives you the background details you need to run this in class. So we've provided some suggested curriculum connections, a list of the topics covered, and a short methods section about the different questions that students will be answering and how you might split those up in a classroom. We've also included an extensive list of resources in the teacher workbook. So for the students, they get a little short list of suggested resources as a jumping off point. But in the teacher one, we've provided a much longer list with everything from infographics, short news articles to journal articles, depending on what is going to make sense for your students and their engagement in the topic. So this is one of those places where we really encourage teachers to choose the resources that are going to work for their space. All right, I've been talking lots. I'm hopefully going to pass this over. I'd love to hear from you all a little bit. When we're thinking about making this something that is usable and practical for your classrooms. So I have on the next slide, I have that list of the different case studies again. So I'll flip to that in a minute and I'll drop these questions in our chat. But I'm curious where a case study might fit well into your curriculum. Is there a unit or a content piece that a case study might cover well? And are there skills or competencies that you could see emphasizing or being supported by a case study? This might be student research, reading comprehension, presentation skills, writing skills. But this is also a really good question that if your students are in the habit of goal setting or self-assessment can be asked of them. What skill would you like to learn while you're working on this case study? Are you hoping to work towards a really quality presentation? Are you hoping to improve your research skills? So, get myself organized here. So I'll pause for a minute. I've dropped those questions in the chat so you can see them, and then I have the list of case studies and their key questions. You're more than welcome to choose one of these and focus on it as we're thinking about how you might incorporate this into your classroom, but you're also welcome to just follow along and see where this might fit generally. If you have some thoughts about where this might fit in your curriculum, whether it's in a school or in a informal education setting, or if there's pieces of the case study, if you're in a less traditional education space, um, please feel free to drop those in the chat.
Amelia, while we wait for people to add their input, I
Mhm.
wondered if you could let us know how these five were chosen. Like, what was the process for these particular case studies?
That's a really good question. So I've been with DUC for about a year. So the ones that I know a little more about are the most recent, the Boreal and Invasive Phragmites. And part of the reason why those were chosen was that we had active conservation projects or partnerships that were happening, and we had conservation specialists who we could talk to review the science and offer input. Um, Ducks Unlimited Canada does a lot of work in the Canadian prairies. So I imagine that's why we started there. Um, and sea level rise on Atlantic Canada. I don't know if I can say why exactly it was chosen. Um, but it definitely is nice to have as, along with the wildfire case study, the two case studies that really dive into climate change and the impacts. Not that they're all not definitely impacted, but those ones especially. Mhm. I have a few curriculum kind of connections as well that I'd like to share, but I definitely know they are Canadian examples and they're definitely traditional education space examples. So I'll offer those, but of course, yeah, always interesting to hear what people are doing in other spaces. Before and after survey, I'm going to read this comment out because these are lovely and just in case you don't have the chat up. When you're doing school presentations, we conduct a before and after survey with the students, asking ways they think they can help, what human behavior affects the endangered species, and if they're familiar with the species. That's from Alina. Thanks, Alina. Yeah, absolutely. a lot of these case studies, a great way to do that introduction to kick things off is to ask students what they might already know, a little, maybe not a formal survey, but a little conversation at the start, because students often will have heard something or have some idea. And it's either interesting to draw on that knowledge, or if students are unfamiliar with a topic, to kind of see what that entrance point might be for them.
Thanks for sharing all of this. I am working at the undergraduate level and developing a new class where students are considering wildlife and wildlife conservation and management in the context of global change. And so I appreciate this suite of resources as a way to kind of think about what I can do to incorporate case studies in my class.
Mm.
And sorry, go ahead.
No, thanks. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
And so one of the things also I mentioned earlier in my comments was like scaling up for above, 9 through 12, getting more into like the
Yeah.
actual conceptual content, right? And I love that there's like getting students to think about single large versus several small theory for the case of the prairie potholes. So in terms of how I would fit something like this into my curriculum, I think there's a lot of ways because I tend to enjoy group-based activities and I enjoy opportunities to give students a chance to feel agency where it's more engaging for them if they feel like a choice in things. And then in terms of the skills, in those group activities, I very often am looking to see them get more comfortable in working with each other and group presentation skills, communications, a lot of stuff that, as we've all been navigating through various phases of the COVID world, getting people back together, and building friendships ideally along the way while they're learning these new topics. So that's kind of me just thinking off the top of my head about ways that activities like this could be a value add in the classroom or at the undergrad level.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. It's really interesting to think about also those same group working skills are so valuable, and it's really neat to see the students that take these projects on and the group work that goes into it at the high school level for sure. I imagine at the undergrad level.
Do you all provide any sort of consulting resources to instructors who are trying to adapt this content into their curricula, or is really the intention that it's self-sufficient and self-sustaining and you send it out into the world and let people turn it into their own thing, or a little bit of both?
Mostly at this point, it's mostly that it's self-sustaining, that people take it out and really like adapt it as much as they need. That this is a great jumping off point, and for some people it works in exactly the form it comes in, and for other people, they take it and adapt it quite a bit. Yeah. And I'll just read this other comment here. Being in a growing city, I think the Prairie pothole case study would be interesting and get the kids thinking about the importance of wildlands and wetlands. We have done PVLs with partners in camp that may be usable in a similar way. Yeah, absolutely. Um, I'll run through a few of these curriculum connections quick and move on to some other parts of the like practical elements of running this into classroom. But absolutely feel free to add comments or unmute if anyone wants to jump in. So to offer a few examples of where these might fit, this is a grade 12 biology course in Manitoba. This is a really straightforward connection. So a unit on the conservation of biodiversity. This is a great one for the wetland biodiversity and temperate grasslands case studies. So reasons for maintaining biodiversity, strategies to conserve, and also investigating an issue. We do find a lot of the courses have a prompt or a content or a curriculum outcome that asks students to look at a specific issue. And I'm just going to take a second and read comments so I don't miss things. Hmm. Um, Definitely scaling things down and taking piece of these. I'm just reading Kai's comment here. Um, would be a neat way to adapt these as well. Yeah, I'm just reading Amanda's comment. So these can take like a longer period of time if you'd like. Um, and you'll have to tell me, Amanda, if I've got your question right. So often we do them as longer research projects where students are taking um, anywhere from like a week to 3 weeks to do their research and come up with their final presentation. But we've also had students just do condensed projects where they do a little bit of reading. It can be structured by the teacher, or a teacher chooses a resource to explore with a class, and not necessarily do a longer form research project. To offer another connection, this could be a younger science class. This is Science 9 in Ontario. They have a biology strand looking at sustainable ecosystems and climate change. And this one fits really well with the Boreal wildfire case study, especially talking about the impacts of climate change on different communities. We also really encourage people to maybe take these a little bit out of their comfort zone. If you're a teacher who's interested in geography and science, but maybe you're in an arts course like a human geography course, there's lots of chances to do the things that this human geography course in British Columbia suggests. So things like analyzing data, looking at how human activities alter landscapes, and looking at interactions between physical features on a landscape and human interactions. In this example, we've paired the sea level rise case study in Atlantic with a British Columbia course. And even though these are really different locations, um, we've also had students who've had a lot of fun learning about a different region and coming in without that background knowledge and learning about landscapes, land use, historic uses of land that they're unfamiliar with. So I mentioned earlier that when we run these case studies, we start with a little workshop to get students excited. Um, because ours is kind of a larger event, we also, like I said, offer two different case studies, and we kind of introduce the idea of a competition to students. But there are lots of ways to get students excited and introduce them to these topics. Um, it could be on the kind of super available, accessible end, reading the workbook background. But if it's a local case study, it's a great opportunity to invite a local speaker or read about a local news story that students might be familiar with. And like it was suggested, engaging student knowledge or asking students what they're already familiar with is a great way to do that as well. Research for these case studies can look a lot of different ways, and we've seen teachers structure these in different ways in their own classrooms. Some of the suggestions that we've provided is to maybe think about how guided versus independent you'd like research to look in your class. So on the guided side, the teacher might choose the readings that make sense for their class, their reading level, their ability to read more scientific articles versus maybe using a video or a podcast to get students interested. Structuring whole class discussions to make sure everyone's receiving the same information. And then having teacher-supported introductions to topics that might be unfamiliar. On the much more independent side, students can choose their case study and run with that workbook. They can start with the suggested research. They can find other sources to support their research. And they can work in those small research groups, helping each other. And then, of course, there's all this area in between. So these can be run with peer expert groups where small groups of students become experts on different parts of the case study and then share that knowledge with each other. Small group discussions are a great way to have students bounce ideas off each other. And then to have some key concept review as a whole class to do check-ins that students understand what's happening in the case study. For folks who work in these sorts of spaces, who do these programs, whether it's with slightly younger students or in more informal contexts, what of these might work in your spaces, or in past have worked well in your spaces? I think when we run these, we see a lot of independent student research, students in small groups taking on the research on their own. Um, but we definitely have teachers who offer a more structured approach, and really guide students through, or decide as a class that they're doing one case study and offer one or two resources that everyone's going to read together. Combination of things, so some guided, some class-based discussions, some independent student-driven research. Yeah, absolutely. We've also seen students take a lot of ownership over that research, especially when they're given that responsibility as high school students, to seek out their own sources and know that they are then, at least when we're running it, presenting to professionals and other instructors, and being able to cite the case studies that they came up with, or mention something that they read and use that to back up their point. There's a lot of pride in the fact that they put that research together themselves. So, of course, case studies are adaptable. They don't always need to be something that's local and relevant to your area. But if it's possible to get students involved locally, that's always a boost for student involvement. Um, so to involve other teachers, if you're in a science class and you can pull in some of that geography knowledge, if you're in a social studies class and can pull in a biology or an ecology teacher to give some extra background, that's great. If you can invite local experts or regional groups to give some context in your area, that can get students more involved. And of course, we offer a bunch of suggested resources, but we really encourage people to include their own and incorporate things that will be more meaningful to students. And we know that a field trip can be a lot to organize, but it's always a bonus if students can go out and see these sites themselves. And since we're thinking about this in a school context, or often we are when we're running these. Oh, and I just got a chat question. So has anyone ever invited media to cover these activities with students? For our case studies, we usually do a little write-up of the students who have done their presentation. I don't know if that's quite what you mean. But so we have some coverage of what students' processes are. But I think that's normally kind of within our network. I don't know how often that is wider than that.
I was just thinking as I was reading the bullets there in terms of the contextual aspect and including local news media. And then I got to thinking, gosh, wouldn't it be neat if students got to have a spotlight shined on them for doing these activities and sort of being the next generation of conservation leaders, and then what kind of visibility that gives the instructors who are putting in the work to do these more creative and perhaps more intensive activities, you know, and what kind of spin-off benefits might come from it if there was a way to do media engagement. So maybe that's something to think of, since you all have an embedded media team within the organization. How might there be a media component to support the teachers and students to get that visibility?
Yeah, definitely. It's a strong but mighty high school program that we have, and we really like to brag about our students and their teachers, because their teachers do put a lot of work into running those case studies. Absolutely. Um, I have a few notes on the screen right now that are just about those adaptations. Ooh, apologies. that teachers incorporate to support their students. We know that every classroom is going to be unique. And on that same point, teachers put a lot of work into adapting these to fit their situations. And so some of the adaptations that help students participate in these case studies include varying those text lengths and reading level options, emphasizing student choice in topic when possible, and also really encouraging students to get creative in how they're putting together their presentation. They can do an audio recording, they can make a visual, they can live present, their whole group can present, their group can take on different roles presenting. Some teachers have used those guiding questions to really have that be the written component that students are submitting if they need more support than independently writing a long form report. And often classes will offer presentation skills practice for students who maybe haven't had the opportunity to present in front of whether it's the class or these experts or whether it's they haven't presented in person before. So to get out some of those nerves before presentation day. And getting to that presentation day and the end of the case study, we have really encouraged folks to get creative with how they do this. So depending on who is available to you, it's great to have judges, whether it's students that have taken the class before, other teachers in the building, local conservation folks, if you're near a university to invite, a higher education guest judge. We've really enjoyed running the case study format. It gets students excited, and it kind of raises the stakes. They're really invested in their own presentation and their classmates' presentations. But of course, there's no requirement to run this as a competition, but it is an option if it works for you and your students. So getting creative on the presentation side for students, but also in how that day is run. And I mentioned it earlier, but asking challenging questions here is a great way for students to dig into that research once more and to kind of get to flex that muscle of being experts on the topic that they've spent so much time researching. So I pulled some quotes here from students that we've had participate in the past who said that they had friends come and watch them as they practiced and give them feedback. And another group who said, we really wanted to prove to ourselves that we could do it. She was talking about presenting to folks who were experts and to put together a really quality presentation. So I've included a couple reflection questions at the end here, just because I didn't pause on all of those different adaptations. You're welcome to put these in the chat or to think about them for yourselves or to unmute if you'd like to share. So what would a case study look like in your classroom? And how could a case study benefit your students? So is this something that could be value additive for your class? And then after this, before we wrap up, I have a few student examples to share.
Amelia, while folks are thinking, I had another kind of general question for you. One was, so community involvement was kind of a thread going through all of the case studies in terms of what you were asking the students to think about. So I'm just curious, what creativity did you see, or what are some kind of take homes or themes about how students are thinking about how communities could be involved in conservation issues like this?
Yeah, definitely. I think for some students, they maybe haven't considered community involvement before and thinking about the impacts that our conservation decisions can have. So even just taking that step back, you've looked at the science of it all. What do you think the community will think? For some students, that meant looking at case studies. So especially in local news, if they've heard about a community group that is working on this issue, that has community involvement, they might use that as evidence to say this is how we would involve the community in our solution. And in others, I'm thinking of the Phragmites and the wildfires, where depending on the solution, it might be disruptive to communities. Either the having invasive Phragmites in your wetland or having a wildfire in your backyard is exceptionally disruptive. But also the management decisions we make can be disruptive. So thinking about how they would they, host like community engagement sessions, or would they have to bring their management plan to town council to have it approved, and what those human impact decision making steps would look like.
That's great. Thank
And
you.
yeah, absolutely. I'd love to share some of those student examples, and I can pause if folks have uh, comments they'd like to make for sure. So this is Satyrus, Ophelia, and David from Fort Richmond Collegiate in Winnipeg. So they're in Winnipeg. They're very much in the interior of Canada, but they were looking at the sea level rise case study. So Ophelia was a little more familiar with sea level rise. So she said that sea level rise is a serious problem. I moved here from Hong Kong, where I lived along the coast, and I've seen firsthand the impact that sea level rise and the damage it can do. But none of them were familiar with salt marshes or dikes. So these were new topics. So it was a neat combination of a little bit of background knowledge and new things to explore. So after their research, their solution was dike maintenance in key areas. So they decided on a few areas where it felt essential to maintain that human infrastructure, and then other places where they wanted to support salt marsh reconstruction. And this is one of those cases where the judges really commented on the fact that they built in community engagement and that their reasoning and their solution included environmental and economic considerations. This is Noah, Oliver, and Owen from Aldershot School in Ontario. And I just spoke with them maybe 2 months ago. They won this year's most recent case study looking at the wildfire case study. And so they hadn't lived near forest fires, but when I spoke to them, they had talked about when there was forest fires in Quebec and the smoke that they were seeing in their province. And when I asked them about why they chose this case study, they were just really interested in the boreal forest. They didn't know a lot about this ecosystem. They thought it was fascinating how big it was. And they kind of had this sense that they knew wildfires were a growing concern, but maybe hadn't had a chance to kind of do a deep dive on the topic. So ultimately, their solution was a wetland policy. They wrote a proposed government wetland policy for boreal wetlands. They thought this was neat because wetlands act as natural fire breaks. And what's kind of not captured here is that their group actually spent the most time looking at fire breaks. They were really certain that this was going to be the solution. They looked at mechanically constructed ones. They looked at green fire breaks. They looked at hand-built fire breaks. But then after considering the ecological impacts and the cost, pivoted and started to look at wetland policy. And it kind of made their solution stand out because they really had to explain their thought process and their research and how they moved from one solution to another. They also had a lot of fun with their presentation, and we watched them. They were outside and they got really excited about how they were going to present this project as well. The last student example that I'll highlight here is Hamza, Zaid, and Hyder, also from Fort Richmond in Winnipeg. They were looking at the wildfire management case study, and they wanted to create a math formula. They were like, there's a way we can solve this with an analytical formula to come up with the best solution depending on where you are. So they were really proud of this. They told us how much work they put in, how many hours of class time they spent on it. And of course, we were also really impressed. So what you see here is their flow chart that takes into consideration number of people in an area, forest cover, wildfire risk, nearby wetlands. And they actually initially had this on their computer as a formula, and kind of shortly before the presentation realized, oh, we need to make this something that's visually interesting and that's going to guide people through our thinking. And ultimately came up with this flow chart that it really, really stunned the judges. They were really impressed. This was super exciting to see from these students. And Jen, their teacher, was really proud of what they'd come up with. I know it's small. Hopefully you can kind of get a sense of the things that they were thinking of here. So it is really lovely and exciting to get to shout out these students who have put so much work in and have come up with these really interesting solutions. And talking to them all is fantastic. They all have different takes on what the research process was like and if it was challenging and how working in small groups was. We often hear about their relationships with each other and what those conversations looked like too. I have a few quotes from some students and a judge and Jen, the teacher at Fort Richmond. Um, Please take some time and read them, but I have a few that I'll kind of shout out. So Sydney here, who's a student on the top left at Wellington Heights, talked about spending a lot of time debating both sides, which is often what we hear from students. They often come in with a thought of which way the case study might go, and their research is either works to confirm or complicate their understanding of an issue. And working in groups allows them to bounce ideas off each other and to ask questions and challenge their initial assumptions about a topic. Naya in the bottom right corner talked about that this put things into perspective for her and made her realize that this is a real problem and the scale of a problem, which is a thing we sometimes hear. But students also talk about hearing all the contours and nuances of the solutions, so that there are a lot of people working on these issues from a lot of different angles, and there are different tools that we're learning how to use to address these problems. And then I was just going to shout out Owen at Aldershot in the bottom left there, who talked about their ability to enjoy the process as a group and have fun. So it is a longer, often extended research project. And hearing the kids talk about what that process was like and the work they put into the research and then their presentation is really exciting. That is the end of my presentation. I'll jump to that last slide and share my resources with you, but I'll leave these quotes up for a second. We're really excited to be involved in conservation education. We work a lot with elementary school students, but it's also really exciting to get to dive deeper with older students. And we work with a really wonderful group of teachers and scientists to help make this competition happen. And if this is something that you adapt or take a part of or try with your students or take some inspiration from, we'd love to hear what was helpful, what went well, what was challenging. And so that we can, apply those lessons when we share these with others as well. I'll put a few links in the chat just so that you're able to find our resources and to reach out to me or our team if you'd like. And I'm not running anywhere. I'll hang out for a bit as well. But yeah, thank you all for your time and your patience. I really appreciate it. And yeah, if there's anything that you feel I've missed or other questions that come up once you've left this session today, please do reach out. I am just sharing the link to those resources and our education newsletter. And we're just education@ducks.ca if you want to get in touch with us.
Thank you so much for sharing your time and all of this information. I enjoyed hearing about it and seeing all those smiling faces. I had one of those mornings where I was listening to the news and I was just like, oh boy, And so having a moment to just take it back to like what it's like to be still naive in the world and an enthusiastic learner and a creative thinker and seeing these kids, coming up with interesting solutions. It was a nice shot in the arm, and I have a lot to think about in terms of inspiration for using case studies in my class. So thank you.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate it. Definitely. And working with students is always a great reminder of why we do this and why we put these together. And they come with such fresh ideas. We had a wonderful group come to our Phragmites case study with exactly which goat they would like to organize to eat the Phragmites. And how they were going to get those goats out there doing good invasive species work. The type of goat or its name, I believe that they had chosen like the I guess I don't want to say species, but the specific breed, I guess, of goat. Yeah. The specific breed of goat that they were going to employ. They figured it was I wish I could tell you which breed they had chosen. They figured it was a sturdy goat that could make its way through the like thick stands and wouldn't be deterred. We found our wildfire and our um, sea level rise case studies are really popular student choices. Um, Selling them on that the nuance of the one small or several, or sorry, one large or several small, it can be a little trickier, but it's always interesting. And we had lots of students take on the Phragmites this year. I'm sure it'll only be a matter of time till we have a Phragmites winning solution as well.
Were any of the judges for the wildfire one people who are actively engaged in the wildfire, either policy or, actually out in the field fighting fires?
No active wildfire fighters, but we have Rick Murray, who works at our Boreal Wetland Center in northern, where would he be in? He's in Grand Prairie. Did some of the work for our wildfire case study, as well as, oh, terrible, her name is escaping me right now, but she also works on our Boreal team. Um, Doing outreach on boreal wetlands and ecosystem management. I want to shout her out appropriately. Carrie Manna, who works on the wetland knowledge exchange with the Boreal team. So looking at community engagement, knowledge exchange, and scientific communication, like specifically in that region. We did have for our Phragmites case study, we had some of our team that's been working on the management of Phragmites in Ontario and Quebec, and also looking at biocontrol in those regions and introducing students to the idea of biocontrol and the pros and cons and public perception of employing a biocontrol solution. Ooh, always exciting. Yeah, we try and reach widely and encourage people to reach widely for their judges. It's really interesting to hear the responses students come up with to questions. They don't always know off the spot exactly how they want to answer something, but you can see them reaching for, oh, I remember reading this, and this is the thing that I do know. So can I build on that? Can I, find some way to engage with this expert's question? That's really exciting to see.
Yeah, in the case of the wildfire one, I'm curious to see their flow chart and everything, because there is a open access application called ATAK, ATAK, and it's all about active real-time situational awareness. And it's based on, GIS, GPS related satellite tools, but helping firefighters on the ground be more safe and more strategic with how they are fighting the fires, as well as upper level coordination, oversight, all these things. Like, it's a multifaceted tool that has a lot of benefits. And thinking, it makes me wonder about those individual layers of data that platform uses, and then the flow chart of the data that the students were trying to consider in their calculations. And it would be so interesting to line up the two side by side and see where there's overlap, where there's complementarity, help the student think about a variable that they didn't necessarily know to think about, or maybe the creativity of what they came up being this thing that these seasoned men and women who are all crusty from years of field work, whatever, hadn't thought of, just that's what immediately came to mind. So, and I say crusty
That's
with
really
love and
interesting.
affection because they're dear friends.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and I think that you were saying like on the ground, like situational decision making. Like the students were definitely thinking like if we had time, is there a chance to introduce beavers? And like, are we in a rural space? Like what kind of species do we have? So they're kind of thinking of like I think like that slower side of decision making, but also as students are um living through these summers where we were really actively in wildfire seasons and having to make quicker decisions of do we cut a fire break and what does that look like? Yeah, I'm curious what other variables, yeah, they could pull from something like that.
So just looking at
Fantastic.
the
Well,
top of the hour. Yes.
totally.
Sorry. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
all
This is
so
great.
much. Thank you for the tech support. Thank you all for your time today. I really appreciate it and for your comments. And yeah, I'll be hanging out for a little bit more of the afternoon. I really appreciate the chance to be here and share this.